The vast North Atlantic has always whispered of wonder and danger, where ice floes drift like islands, where steel hulls meet pounding surf, and where human ambition collides with nature's infinite patience. In the spring of 1914, one vessel slipped from existence, the SS Southern Cross. She sailed from port into open seas, but she never reached home, and 174 men vanished with her. This is not a tale of war. It is a tale of labor, of men venturing into ice and cold to harvest seals, of hope and risk tied together by cord and chain, and of the sea reclaiming what humans send forth. It is a story that holds in miniature every voyage into the unknown. Launched in 1886 in Norway under the name Pollux, she was built for harsh seas. Later renamed the Southern Cross, she became part of a fleet that voyaged from Newfoundland into the treacherous seal hunting grounds. At 146 feet long, designed by the famed shipbuilder Colin Archer, she was sturdy by the standards of her day. But the North Atlantic in March is a different creature. When she left port on 31st March 1914, she carried a full cargo of seals and oil, her decks stacked with pelts, her engines churning through waves. Captain George Clark led her, an experienced sealer, and his crew of 174 men were mostly young, rugged fishermen from Newfoundland's outports. They were not heading into war. They were working for survival, wages, families, and tradition. At that time, the Newfoundland sealing fleet was vital. Each spring, ships moved south from St. John's toward the Gulf of St. Lawrence or the ice fields off Labrador. They loaded pelts, oil, and hope. The route home should have been straightforward. Yet every year, a few vessels never made it, trapped in ice, crushing hulls, or beset by storms. The Southern Cross was one of those that did not return. Her path should have taken her from the ice fields back toward Newfoundland, past Cape Race, and through storm-tossed seas. But the late March season holds a storm window that can close in minutes. Ice drifts, blizzards, and gale-force winds are all part of the business. For many ships, the return voyage is the most perilous. On the storm morning of 31st March, the Southern Cross was last seen by a nearby vessel off Cape Pine. The ship looked heavy in the water, her cargo piled deep, her deck low above the waves. The other vessel, seeking shelter, turned away. But the Southern Cross pressed on through sleet and gray seas. The sky roared, the wind shrieked, and the Atlantic became a furnace of spray and ice. No distress call, no warning signal, no survivors. The ship simply disappeared into the storm. When hours became days and she did not arrive, alarm mounted in port. Dockside families stood on the wharf amid fog and cold, waiting for a sight they would never see, her black funnel cutting through waves. The sea offered no answer. For Newfoundland's coastal communities, the loss was more than a number. Each home had someone aboard, a brother, a father, a son. The sealing ships brought not just pelts, but paychecks, hope for the summer ahead. Without them, families faced hardship, uncertainty, silence. In one season, a vessel vanished and men simply did not come back. In small villages, children played by empty chairs. Wives waited for signals that never came. Mothers gazed out across white-capped water, longing for a silhouette that would not return. The southern spring of 1914 would be marked in memory as the moment when the sea reclaimed more than fish. It claimed lives and futures. The Southern Cross was no stranger to ice. Every year, she had battled through frozen seas to reach the sealing grounds, places where the Atlantic hardened into glittering plains of white, where the sound of cracking ice echoed like thunder. Her hull was strengthened for those conditions, her crew hardened by experience. But even seasoned men can underestimate the sea when it changes its mind. By early March 1914, the ship had already spent weeks deep in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The men worked 16 hours a day on the floes, hauling seals, cutting fat, stacking pelts. The smell of oil and blood hung over the deck. Their clothes stiffened with salt and frost. Every load meant more weight below deck, more profit in the holds, and more risk on the homeward run. Captain Clark, a practical man, was satisfied. They had a full cargo, enough to make the voyage worthwhile. The men looked forward to home, to firelight and rest. On 29th of March, he ordered the ship turn toward Newfoundland. It should have been a straightforward return. A few days at sea, a safe berth in St. John's, and then unloading and celebration. But on the evening of the 30th, the wind began to rise. Out on the Grand Banks, barometers were falling fast. The crew of another vessel, the Portia, logged a sudden pressure drop and thickening fog. The North Atlantic was brewing something fierce, a March gale, the kind that could shatter ice and split masts in hours. At dawn on the 31st, the Portia sighted a ship through sleet and rolling waves. She was heading east-southeast, heavy and slow, her bow plunging into the swells. Through the mist, the name on her hull flickered, Southern Cross. Her decks were laden almost to the rails with frozen pelts, her funnel coughing smoke against the wind. For a few minutes, the two ships were visible to each other. Then fog swept in like a curtain, and the Southern Cross was gone. That would be the last time any human eyes saw her afloat. By midday, the wind reached hurricane strength. Waves towered over 20 meters, rolling mountains of black water capped with foam. The air itself seemed alive, roaring, howling, scouring the decks of any loose gear. The ice that had carried the hunters days before now slammed against hulls like battering rams. Inside the Southern Cross, the crew would have been fighting a losing battle. The cargo shifted with every roll. Ice clogged the scuppers. Seawater froze on deck. Men with axes hacked at the ice, desperate to lighten her load. In the engine room, stokers fed coal into the furnace as the ship lurched, the heat of the boiler colliding with the freezing air outside. Every shudder of the hull meant another blow from the sea. There are stories told in Newfoundland to this day, of ships that rolled once too far, of waves that struck like hammers, of holds that filled faster than pumps could drain. Somewhere in that storm, it happened to the Southern Cross. A single breaking sea may have come over her stern, pushing her under before anyone could react. No one will ever know exactly how she went down. Only the Atlantic knows. On shore, St. John's braced for arrivals. One by one, ships battered by the gale limped into harbor. Funnels bent, masts cracked, decks swept clean. Their men told stories of a storm so fierce the sky turned white with spray. Families crowded the docks, waiting for each whistle of an incoming vessel, hoping the next one would be hers. Hours stretched into days. Newspapers listed ships arrived and ships overdue. The name Southern Cross appeared again and again with the same note beside it. Not yet reported. In kitchens and taverns, people whispered theories. Maybe she had sought shelter in another bay. Maybe her wireless had failed. Maybe she was riding it out offshore. But as days turned into a week, those hopes thinned. Wreckage began washing up, bits of barrel, torn pieces of wood, a life buoy without markings. Nothing certain, nothing that said Southern Cross. By April 5th, the colonial authorities sent vessels south along the coast to look for signs. Aircraft didn't exist there yet. The search was by ship and by eye. They scoured the inlets, the beaches, the ice. Nothing. It was as if the Southern Cross had been erased from the sea. Captain Abram Keene, commanding another sealer, later reported seeing a flare far away during the gale, but it was impossible to reach it in the storm. Whether that was her or another doomed vessel, no one could tell. In the confusion of snow and wind, the sea swallowed all clues. By the second week of April, the search turned to recovery, not rescue. Families were told gently that hope was gone. The storm had taken her. The government declared all 174 men lost. The shock rolled through Newfoundland like thunder. Churches filled with weeping, schools closed for mourning. For a small island whose life was bound to the sea, it was not just a maritime tragedy, it was a national wound. When the official list was read aloud in St. John's, silence fell over the crowd. 174 names, fathers, sons, brothers. Some families lost 3 or 4 men at once. The sea that had fed Newfoundland for generations had claimed more lives in one storm than anyone could remember. The following morning, church bells rang across the island. Flags were lowered to half-mast. The premier declared a day of mourning. It was not just grief, it was disbelief. How could a modern steel ship, with an experienced captain and a crew hardened by years in the ice, vanish without a trace? The loss of the Southern Cross came only days after another catastrophe, the disaster of the Newfoundland sealing ship, where dozens of men froze to death on the ice. Together, the two events became known as the Great Newfoundland Sealing Disasters of 1914. They exposed the brutal risks of the sealing trade and the desperate economic pressure that had driven men to sea despite the warnings of bad weather. In the weeks that followed, every newspaper in the colony carried the story. Editorials demanded answers. Families gathered in town halls asking why their men had been sent out at all. The government launched an inquiry, but it could do little with so little evidence. There were no survivors to question, no wreck to examine, no clear sign of where she went down. The inquiry concluded only what everyone already knew, that the Southern Cross was lost with all hands somewhere off Cape Race between March 31st and April 2nd, 1914. The cause, overloading and extreme weather. But that explanation satisfied few. In the absence of proof, theories grew like weeds. Some said the ship's heavy cargo of salted pelts had frozen solid, turning her into a floating block of ice that capsized when she rolled. Others suggested her seams split under pressure, flooding her holds faster than the pumps could keep up. There was even talk that she might have made it close to shore, that perhaps she had been driven onto rocks near the Burin Peninsula and sank unseen in the fog. A few fishermen claimed to have seen dark shapes drifting in the surf days later, but nothing was ever confirmed. Every year the sea shifts its bottom, burying and uncovering wrecks. Even now, more than a century later, sonar scans have found nothing that can be confidently identified as the Southern Cross. Somewhere beneath the cold Atlantic lies the answer, but the ocean is not generous with its secrets. Economically, the loss was devastating. Dozens of coastal communities depended on sealing wages to survive. With so many men gone, families faced a winter of hunger. Relief funds were set up, churches organized collections, and women worked together to care for the children of the lost. In outports along the coast, black flags were hung from fishing sheds. The sound of hammering coffins for those never recovered echoed across harbors that would never see their men return. Yet amid the grief, the people of Newfoundland did what they had always done. They endured. Within months, new ships were fitted out for the next sealing season. The trade went on, but no one ever looked at those voyages the same way again. Over time, the story of the Southern Cross became more than a tragedy. It became a legend. School children learned her name. Songs were written in her memory. Folk ballads sung in pubs and at kitchen tables, the verses speaking of brave men and the cruel sea. In 1919, a monument was raised on the waterfront in St. John's, engraved with the names of the lost. Every year since, families have gathered there on the anniversary of her disappearance to lay flowers and light candles. The Southern Cross became a symbol of something larger, the thin line between survival and disaster in a world ruled by the sea. Her story reminded people that the ocean, for all its beauty and bounty, demands respect. To this day, maritime historians still debate what exactly happened. Modern simulations suggest that, overloaded with wet cargo and caught broadside by hurricane-force gusts, she could have capsized in less than a minute. Others argue she may have taken on water through open hatches and sunk stern first. But without a wreck, all is conjecture. Every few years, expeditions set out to search again, armed with sonar and submersibles. They sweep the seabed south of Newfoundland, scanning ridges and valleys where the cold current flows. They have found wrecks from both world wars, but never the Southern Cross. Each time they return empty-handed, the mystery deepens. Though her story ends in tragedy, the Southern Cross is remembered not for her loss, but for the courage of those who sailed her. They were ordinary men who faced extraordinary odds, men who braved ice, storm, and darkness to earn a living in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their story became part of Newfoundland's identity, a reminder of endurance, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between people and sea. Today, when you stand on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic and the wind howls across the rocks, you can almost hear them. The echo of engines beneath the waves, the voices of men calling through the storm. The ship that never reached shore still sails in memory, carried on the wind and in the hearts of those who remember, for the ocean never forgets.